Now here we went up CIELO Drive, and it didn't turn out too good. We got honked at and cursed out, and that's fair. We really shouldn't be up there. It's extremely narrow. It's people's homes and pretty much essentially a driveway, so I wouldn't recommend going up there, at least for me again. But I just wanted to get a good shot of the gate. This is the best one that I could come up with. They backed down and parked pretty close to the intersection at CIELO and Benedict Canyon, then walked back up and got past the gate. To the right of the gate, there was a little embankment. Before we kind of go into everything that happened up there, I do want to say that Stephen Parent met William Garretson. From what I've read, Stephen Parent picked up William Garretson, who was hitchhiking, and dropped him off there. And William Garretson said, hey, if you're ever in the area, stop by. So Stephen Parent had a transistor radio that he was going to try to sell to William Garretson, so he did stop by. William was not interested in that. So, after they hung out for a little bit, Stephen Parent was exiting. And as he was exiting, it was in that same moment that he was confronted by Tex, just as Tex got past the gate. But Tex went out by himself as he saw Stephen Parent's headlights coming towards the gate. Unfortunately, Stephen was shot 5 times by Tex, and there was a knife-like slash on his left hand.
A car came up to the driveway, and I remember Tex getting out, and without saying anything, there were gunfire shot. I was in the bushes. And
that's when the young boy Stephen Parent was killed in the car outside.
Right.
Tex enters through a front window and lets in Susan and Patricia Krenwinkel. Now Sharon Tate and Jay Sebring are in the back bedroom hanging out. The killers grab those two and bring them to the living room. Abigail Folger was in her room reading a book, and she actually waves to Susan Atkins, thinking that she was just a visitor, that someone else knew at the party or at the house hanging out. They then bring Abigail to the living room. Wojtek was already asleep on the couch in the living room. So at this point, there are 4 people in the living room. Wojtek was a large man. He was able to break the ties and flee, as did Abigail Folger, and they both made it outside the premises. Tex chases down Wojtek and stabs him 51 times in the lawn area and shoots him twice. Patricia Krenwinkel chases Abigail down outside, stabs her 28 times. 2 bodies are on the lawn now, and during that stabbing, Abigail said to Patricia that, I'm dead already. You can stop stabbing me. Jay Sebring is now in the house with Sharon, and he is shot once and stabbed 7 times by Tex, leaving Sharon Tate, the last of the victims, to be laying there with her child inside of her, fighting for her life, begging for her life, and they showed her no mercy. Susan stabbed Sharon 16 times.
All I can remember seeing is people just scattering in different places and running in different places. And I was sitting with Sharon Tate, and she was talking to me, and I remember that I had absolutely, I felt nothing. I felt absolutely nothing for her as she begged for her life and for the life of her baby. And Jesus. I remember when we first went in, one of the people said, "Who are you?" And Tex said, "I'm the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's business."
It's important to note that Susan Atkins later on said that she didn't actually do the stabbing, that it was Tex, but I believe Susan the first time. I think this was after she was locked up for X amount of years that she changed her story.
The first set of neighbors as you leave 10050 CIELO Drive are Mr. and Mrs. Seymour Cott.
So Mr. and Mrs. Cott had dinner guests over that night, the night of 8/8, and those guests left around midnight. Now, according to Mrs. Cott, somewhere between 12:30 and 1 a.m., she does remember hearing 3 to 4 gunshots, but thinking nothing else of it, she went to bed. So about 3/4 of a mile south of the residence, there was a Westlake school for girls. And there was a counselor by the name of Tim Ireland. They were having an outdoor camp out, and he heard what he thought was gunfire around 12:40. They seemed like a long distance away, is what he said, north to northeast. And he remembers hearing a male screaming, "Oh God, no, please don't, oh God, no, don't." That scream, according to Mr. Ireland, lasted about 10 to 15 seconds. So Ireland lets another counselor know that, hey, this is what I heard. I'm going to go take a drive. And he took a drive around the area, not to the specific street or anything, because there was no way of really telling where that was. Circled the area and didn't see anything out of place. Here we are at Harvard Westlake School, currently in 2021. And you can see, from the view that I got anyway, you can see right up to the hill where the CIELO location stood. And on a quiet night, this estimates it at 0.44 miles away, but on a quiet night up in those hills, you can probably hear pretty crystal clear as far as what was going on up there. So any kind of gunshots or probably even screaming, I could see them hearing that. At 9951 Beverly Grove Drive, a man by the name of Emmett Steele, he was awakened by his hunting dogs on or around 2 to 3 a.m. So here's an aerial shot showing 9951 Beverly Grove Drive and the distance it was from 10050 CIELO. It has it at 0.37 miles. Again, the quiet night, and it's not going to be a problem to hear the commotion going on up there. In front of 2175 Summit Ridge Drive, there was a Bel Air patrol employee named Richard Bullington. He called it in at his headquarters to an Eric Carlson, who then called it into the West LA Division of LAPD at 4:11 a.m. According to Bullington, there were 3 shots that were spaced a few seconds apart. When the call went into LAPD, the officer remarked, "I hope we don't have a murder. We just had a woman screaming call in that area." And in this one here, you can see it was 0.77 miles away from the 2175 Summit Drive address to 10050 CIELO Drive. Again, close, quiet hills. You're going to hear things. At 4:30 to 4:45 a.m., the LA Times paperboy pedaled his bike up CIELO, and that's pretty steep. But he pedaled his bike up CIELO, and he did notice what he thought to be phone wire draped over the gate, as well as the yellow bug lights still on the side of the garage. He puts the paper in the mailbox and leaves. At 7:30 a.m., Seymour Cott went to retrieve his paper and noticed the phone wire was down as well, hanging over the side of the fence, and also the light on still on the outside of the garage. So apparently the light being on in the daytime at 10050 CIELO Drive, that light on the outside of the garage is always off. So when it was left on, more than a few people noticed the difference. So at this point, the killers went back down the hill, jumped in the vehicle, and headed up Benedict Canyon, where they then made a right on Portola Drive. Portola Drive is extremely narrow street, so they pull up to 9870 Portola Drive, get out, and start hosing off at this hose spigot that's in the yard.
Now, according to the testimony of Linda Kasabian, when they went up Portola Drive, they made a U-turn and came back down. They got out to use the hose, and first the woman that lived there came out, asking questions. "Who are you?" Warning them that her husband was a deputy, and they just said they just wanted some water. So
it must have been about 1 o'clock. I heard the sound of running water. So I jumped out of bed and grabbed the flashlight, and I went downstairs into the basement. opened the garage door, thinking that something had gone wrong with the plumbing. There was nothing wrong with it. I couldn't see any water of any kind. And then I heard voices on the street outside. So I went over, and here were 4 people standing. And of course, you know the exact place.
Yes.
Around the corner there. Well, I cannot describe the people except the boy was rather tall. The girls I hardly saw, except I knew one of them was short stature. So I put the flashlight on, and I said, "Just what do you think you're doing?" He says, "We're just getting a drink of water, and we're sorry to disturb you." Looking over the people, I figured, well, they're just teenagers out on a Friday night. Well, that I couldn't say, but from what I would guess, they were all Caucasian. The girl started walking down, then I looked down the street and I see a car parked facing west towards the main canyon, Benedict Canyon. So they started proceeded to go down the street towards the car in front of me, and I followed them. And when they got to the car, he, I believe, opened the back door to the back seat, and the girls got in. So then the dome light was on, and I happened to look inside the car, and it was all messed up and dirty and so on and so forth. Things on the floor. So they closed the door. He got into the driver's seat. So in order to scare him, I acted as if I were going to reach for the keys. And that minute, he stepped on his starter and he took off before he closed down the street.
And they made a right. Now the drive from the CIELO address to the Portola Drive address, where they used the hose, shows it being 1.9 miles away, give or take. And here we are on Portola Drive. As you can see, it's extremely narrow. If someone was coming down the street, we'd have to move for him. And it was right about in this area at this home here was where that hose spigot was. I can't really tell at this point where it would be now, or even if it's still there, but it was somewhere in this area is where Tex and the group stopped for water. And from there, they made a right on Benedict Canyon. And right about the area of 2901 Benedict Canyon, across the street from that home, they tossed the clothes over a fence down an embankment. These clothes were later found by reporters who, on a whim, they took I guess an educated guess, maybe not a whim, about leaving CIELO Drive and how long would it take to disrobe and get rid of our clothes. They pulled off on that same dirt patch and saw the clothes well after the murders. And that's how the bloody clothes were discovered. So from that point, they continued on to Benedict Canyon Road and made a left on Mulholland and a right on Beverly Glen. Now Tex throws the gun out of the car with his left hand over the car because he was driving at this point. And from that throw, the gun is slung into the backyard of Stephen Weiss, who we talked about earlier. Now what we do know about the murders of the La Biancas on Waverly Drive is, according to Charles Manson, there was a guy named Harold True that lived next door to the La Biancas that Manson and his group had partied before at that house. So this is how he picked that house or that street. So now the 7 people piled into this car are Charles Manson, Linda Kasabian, the driver, Steve Clem Grogan, Charles Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and a Leslie Van Houten. Manson goes up, peeks through the window, and he can see that Leno is reading the paper. He comes back down, he gets Tex, and the two of them enter the house through a side door, tie up Rosemary and Leno in the living room. Charlie and Tex come back down the driveway where Charles sends Leslie Van Houten and Patricia Krenwinkel to go back up with Tex and do as he says. They enter the house, And Mr. and Mrs. LaBianca at this point are in the living room. The girls take Mrs. LaBianca back to the room. Tex stays in there with Lino and stabbed Lino 12 times with a bayonet. Mr. LaBianca says, "Enough, I'm dead already," which is what Abigail Folger had said the previous night. Now, upon hearing these screams, Mrs. LaBianca in the other room is screaming, "What have you done to my husband?" and starts to fight these two girls, Leslie Van Houten and Patricia Krenwinkel, in the room, swinging a lamp at them, doing whatever she can to fight them off. At this point, Tex comes in and Rosemary is stabbed 41 times, 16 times post-mortem by Leslie Van Houten, because Tex told her and reminded her that Charles Manson said to contribute somehow. So because of this, she stabbed Mrs. LaBianca post-mortem 16 times.
And then Tex turned me around and he handed me a knife and he said, "Do something." And so I went in and Mrs. LaBianca was laying on the floor and I stabbed her in the lower back around 16 times.
Back out in the living room, Mr. LaBianca is stabbed with a fork 7 times, leaving 14 more punctures, and they carved WAR, W-A-R, into his abdomen, leaving the fork protruding from his abdomen. Then they leave a steak knife in his neck. They take a shower, go through the fridge, pet the dogs, and they leave. What's really bizarre is that Charles and Linda and Steve and Susan, they weren't out there waiting for them. They left. So this forced Tex and the two girls, Leslie Van Houten and Patricia Krenwinkel, to hitchhike home. Tex had said he got rid of the bayonet in a body of water. There's a reservoir down the street from the LaBiancas, a large reservoir, that maybe he threw it into that body of water. I've never seen anything where they said they found it. If anyone has, please note that. Let me know. That's, I've always wanted to find that out to see whatever happened to that bayonet. So Tex, Leslie, and Patricia hitchhiked back to Spawn Ranch. Now in the car, Charlie has Rosemary's wallet. They pull off of the freeway in Sylmar. In Sylmar, there's a gas station there and a Denny's. And he instructs Linda Kasabian to go hide Mrs. LaBianca's wallet in the bathroom. And she does so. As a matter of fact, she hides it in the toilet tank, hides it so well that it isn't found till 4 months later. In the meantime, Charles goes over to Denny's and grabs milkshakes for everyone in the car. So here we are at the gas station and Denny's where Charles Manson went to get those 4 milkshakes for himself, Susan Atkins, Linda Kasabian, and Steve Clem Grogan, and where Linda Kasabian went to the restroom there at the gas station and hid Rosemary LaBianca's wallet. And then they take off to Venice Beach, and they are looking for an actor named Saladin Nader, who the girls have frequented before, and Charles wanted the girls to kill Saladin right there in his apartment. But Linda Kasabian didn't want to do that. She didn't want anyone else dying, so on purpose, she knocked on the wrong door, and someone else answered and said, "No, there's no Saladin here." And after that, they head back to Spawn Ranch. Now here is Spawn Ranch today, present time, of course. An aerial shot here I wanted to see up and over it because it's so overgrown to walk in there, which I've got footage of that, which I'll put in. But anyways, the main marker that I went off of was this rock formation here on the left. That would be kind of your landmark to know exactly where it was. It was pretty much across the street from there, and you can see that in these other pictures here dating back to when it was operational. And shout out to Jose Gomez and Rafa Palomo. They went out and got this footage for me, these aerial shots here, and it really gives you a better perspective of the area looking down on it, because like I said, the brush and everything there is kind of tough to make your way around in there to really see what was going on from the ground level. So thanks to those guys. And here is
on the ground, walking through the brush and stuff. The address then was 12000 Santa Susana Pass.
Spawn Ranch was, during this time, headquarters for Charles Manson and his followers. This is where they all stayed, where they all rendezvoused. And these two particular nights that these murders happened, Spawn Ranch was where the orders were handed out to carry out these heinous crimes. This is where the followers left from to go commit them and returned to. Second night, left from Spawn Ranch and returned to. It was a 55-acre movie ranch that the followers were living at. That's where they were just hanging out and living for free, and they were almost hiding in plain sight. So it's a very important player in this whole broad scope of things. It is the headquarters of it all. Of course, now it's abandoned and it receives a lot of visitors, but this is where it all derived. Between that and Barker Ranch. Barker Ranch was another ranch where Charles Manson was arrested at for a stolen car ring. And when the officers arrived there to arrest him, he was thinking they were there because of the murders. And it was actually because of stolen cars. So we fast forward to September 1, 1969, about 21 days, roughly 3 weeks after the CIELO Drive murders. And Stephen Weiss, who's a 10-year-old kid, was in his backyard.
And that runs adjacent to Beverly Glen Boulevard. Stephen was up on the slope in his backyard near a sprinkler where he came across the gun. So Stephen lived at 3627 Longview Valley Road. Here we are in front of Stephen's house, and right when we pulled up, a truck pulled up in front of there, so we couldn't get a great shot of the house. But behind his house is Beverly Glen Boulevard. That's the street that runs parallel. And we were going to stop if we could safely. It's just too busy of a street to do so. But here, I'll point it out on Google Earth. You can see where his backyard lines up with Beverly Glen. This is where Tex threw the weapon over the car while in motion, and it landed in Stephen's backyard.
So now we move on to the El Coyote restaurant, which is on Beverly Boulevard. And between 9:45 and 10 p.m., manager John Delgadillo had Jay Sebring on the waiting list, a party of 4 together. Now, this particular manager didn't see the party of 4. A woman by the name of Kathy Palmer did. And she stated that the group of 4 hung out in the bar for about 15 to 20 minutes before they were seated. Now, presumably, this would be Sharon Tate, Wojciech Frykowski, Abigail Folger, and Jay Sebring. Now, when presented with photographs, Miss Palmer wasn't able to, 100% confirm it was the party of 4, but we can presume it was the party of 4. Now, in order for that to be the party of 4, Abigail Folger would have to have left before 10 because her and her mother spoke on the telephone at the CIELO Drive address, talking about a flight the next day, and it was around that same time before 10. Okay, so here we are at El Coyote, and it is at 7312 Beverly Boulevard in LA. This is the best Mexican restaurant I've been to. It's been around some 90 years plus, and of course this is the restaurant that Sharon Tate, Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, and Wojciech Frykowski last dined at. So going through the grounds of CIELO Drive, remember Winifred Chapman picked out the black Porsche belonging to Jay Sebring that was parked there. And inside of that, they found a gram of coke, 6.3 grams of marijuana, and a 2-inch roach. Inside of a plastic bag in a cabinet inside the residence, there was 6.9 grams of marijuana. And in Frykowski and Folger's room, there's 30 grams of hashish, plus 10 capsules that were found to be a new drug at that time, MDA. In Sharon Tate's room, there was marijuana residue in an ashtray, as well as there was a marijuana cigarette on the desk near the front door. Now, looking at this gruesome scene, the police came up with about 5 different theories, and the first one was a drug party that was in progress and one of the partygoers went berserk. maybe from drugs or a bad trip, and just murked everybody in there. That was theory 1. Theory 2, a drug burn, and what that consists of is the killer arrives, or the drug dealer arrives with drugs, and an argument ensues over bad money, bad drugs, whatever the case may be. Now, scenario 3 is a variety of the second one, where the drug dealer, the killer, whoever, decides he wants to keep the money and the drugs. Scenario 4 was a residential burglary. And the 5th one was murder for hire. The most likely one would be scenario 2, where the killer comes and decides, I'm going to take this money, because of an argument or whatever the reason was. He gets heated, takes the money, takes the drugs, and he's out after he kills everyone there. So about 11 p.m., we know that Stephen Parent stopped at Dale's Market in El Monte, and he had a friend there named John. Stephen Parent was dating John's sister at the time, but he asked John, hey, you want to take a ride with me tonight? And John said no, and probably the best decision of his life, considering what happened. What we do know as well is that approximately 11:45 is when Stephen Parent arrived at the CIELO Drive residence, pulled in, hung out in the guest house, and we know he left at about 12:15 a.m., according to Garrettson. Now, I don't know if I'd call this a coincidence, but where Stephen Parent lives is 11214 Bryant Avenue, 3.5 blocks away, 0.3 miles away, on the corner of Maple and Bryant, lived one Gene Elroy and James Elroy, who I coincidentally did my first true crime podcast on, the unsolved murder of Gene Elroy. And James Elroy, of course, the famed crime author. Well, that's where they lived. And the tie-in there is that Gene Elroy, her body was found June 22nd, 1958, on the grounds of Arroyo High School. Arroyo High School is where Stephen Parent went to high school. And it's just, it's kind of bizarre to think that within 3.5 blocks are two heavy, infamous crimes that happened. One of them unsolved, and the other one extremely more popular in this day and age. But look that one up. James Elroy, famous crime author, wrote Black Dahlia, LA Confidential. Again, his mother, Jean Elroy, was murdered and her body dumped at Arroyo High School. And to this day, it remains unsolved. Wilfred and Juanita Parent, the mother and father of Stephen, were extremely worried because their son did not come home the night before. And they were just frantic all day. He didn't leave a note, he didn't call, he had never done this type of thing before. So at one point during the evening, Wilfred decided to take the family out to go eat, and they thought maybe when they get back from eating, Stephen will be there. During this time, a reporter that was on scene at CIELO was able to get the license plate off of the Rambler and track it back to the owners of the car, which would be Wilfred and Juanita Parent. When he got there, nobody was home, so he was able to talk to some neighbors. The neighbors told him that yes, there was a teenage boy that did live at that house. The neighbors got the reporter in touch with Father Byrne, who was the parents' family pastor, and they took a ride down to the coroner. All within the same time, Wilfred and Juanita and the family arrived back home from dinner, and when they got there, an LAPD officer pulled up, knocked on the door, handed Mr. Parent a card and said, call this number, and didn't say much else, just call this number, and left. Mr. Parent called, turned out to be the county coroner's office. The call was transferred to a deputy coroner. The two spoke briefly, and Mr. Parent told him the situation, what led him to call. And the county coroner on the other end said, your son has apparently been involved in a shooting. Mr. Parent asked, is he dead? And the man on the other end said, we have a body down here and we believe it's your son. Physical characterizations matched. And meanwhile, Father Byrne was down there and he ID'd the body as Stephen Parent. Obviously, the Parent family was frantic, distraught. They crawled in bed, all 5 of them, mother, father, and the 3 other children, and finally went to sleep at 5 a.m., just cuddled together, crying until they could fall asleep. Very tragic, very sad, considering Stephen Parent didn't know anybody on the premises, outside of William Garrettson. I mean, he was there amongst the stars, but didn't even know it. And this is what happened. So Stephen Parent's prom date was interviewed by Movie Geeks United, and she went by the name of Tina for the sake of the podcast. Anyway, she gave an entirely different take on that story in regards to the reporter coming to the house. According to Tina, yes, the parents and the family went out to dinner that Saturday, hoping that Stephen would be home by the time they returned. And according to Tina, they went to Knights of Columbus. Stephen's sister, Janet, who Tina said was around the age of 15, stayed home. And according to Tina, this reporter came knocking on the door, and Janet let the reporter in because the reporter said that the Rambler had been stolen, so this is what this is all about. So he comes in and sneaks that picture, that famous prom picture of Stephen and Tina that was inside of the house. And Stephen's sister at this point thought something was awry, so she made the phone call to where they were having dinner, which was the Knights of Columbus restaurant, according to Tina. And she got a hold of her father there and said, hey, you need to come home because something's going on over here. So I don't know why the story differs in Helter Skelter. I'm going to tend to believe Tina's story on that. Now, another thing that I've seen and read reports on and information on were the vehicle that Wojciech Frykowski was driving. I've read that he had borrowed Sharon's yellow Camaro to drive around town as well. I don't know if that's true or false, but that's just what I've heard. So if anyone has any input on that, please leave a comment down below. Again, this was one of those cases that is extremely vast in information. There's so much going on about in and around this case, so I chose to focus on those two nights. Do more research on this, you'll find out a lot more. It's a very interesting case, as sad and traumatic as it was, but it is definitely one that remains in infamy. So thank you for joining me on this. Please leave any comments, anything I may have gotten wrong, anything that you want to add to it. I would appreciate the input, and thank you for tuning in.